In an abandoned factory near the old rail line, a wounded German shepherd lay bleeding. His ribs shattered after throwing himself in front of a bullet meant for a girl he had only just found. The ex-FBI agent fighting beside him, Graham Cole, was trapped between gunfire and the crushing fear that he was about to fail another Holloway sister. But Grace, trembling and bound among the captives, saw something no trafficker ever could. She saw Echo's unbroken loyalty burning through his fading eyes. With nothing left but faith, she crawled to him, covered his battered body with her own, and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone would hear. What happened next was a moment so powerful, it would break your heart and renew your belief in courage, sacrifice, and the unseen hand that protects us in our darkest hour. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story moves your spirit, please subscribe for more. The scream came so suddenly that it carved the night in half. It wasn't the cry of someone calling for help. It sounded like a soul being torn from a body. Graham Cole stopped mid-step. Echo, the sable-black German shepherd walking beside him, froze with him. The dog's ears lifted, his muscles tightened. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, as if he just heard the same kind of suffering he had once failed to stop. A cold shiver ran down Graham's spine. He didn't say a word. Echo didn't need orders. The dog lunged forward across the empty Kansas field, paws striking the hard ground with sharp, determined beats. Graham ran after him, breath burning in his lungs, boots digging into dirt that seemed suddenly endless. The moon was a thin silver blade above them, sharp enough to draw blood. Echo made straight for the old barn at the edge of the property. Its wooden walls leaned like a man dying on his feet, and one of its doors hung crooked, creaking as though whispering warnings to the dark. Echo slipped through the gap first. Graham shoved the door wider and raised his flashlight. The beam shook in his hand. A young woman lay on the barn floor. She was tied at the wrists and ankles, ropes biting deep into her skin, swollen red marks climbing her arms like bruised vines. Her cream cardigan was torn, her beige dress smeared with dirt. Her long chestnut brown hair clung to her cheeks. But it was her eyes, wide, blue, trembling, that stopped Graham's breath. She looked at him as though she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Or perhaps waiting for him. "You're late," she whispered. Her voice cracked like something fragile breaking in his hands. "You came too late." Again. The last word struck him hard. Too hard. It pierced a memory he never allowed himself to touch. A night years ago, when another girl whispered the same thing before the world went silent. Graham forced the thought away and moved toward her. Echo circled the room, nose close to the ground, inspecting every shadow, every ripple of straw. Graham knelt beside the girl. Up close, she was even more heartbreakingly delicate, pale, shaking, breath quick and shallow. "I'm going to untie you," he murmured softly. "You're safe now. I promise." Her lips trembled. "You can't promise that," she whispered. "Not tonight." Graham slid his knife under the rope around her wrists. The fibers snapped. She gasped, the sound halfway between pain and relief. He moved to the ropes around her ankles. Echo suddenly growled, not loudly, but with a depth that made Graham's blood run cold. It was the growl of a dog who sensed death approaching. Headlights sliced across the barn walls. A truck screeched to a stop. Doors slammed. Voices, rough, angry, too close. Graham's jaw tightened. He stepped in front of the girl. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. She nodded, barely, as her body shivered violently. Echo placed himself between her and the door, lowering his stance, fur rising like a storm about to break. Then the barn door was kicked open. 3 men barged in. The first was tall with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down his face. The kind of scar that didn't come from accidents. It came from lifestyle. The second was shorter, twitchy, eyes darting everywhere, like paranoia had carved itself permanently into his nerves. The third was broad, thick-bearded, with a hunting knife already raised. "Well, look at this," the bearded one barked. "The merchandise made a friend." The girl whimpered. Graham stood his ground. "Walk away," he said, voice steady. "You don't want this." The scarred man laughed, a deep, ugly sound. "Oh, buddy, we want exactly this." He lunged first. The twitchy man swung a metal rod at Graham, but Graham sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and twisted sharply. The man collapsed with a broken scream. The bearded attacker rushed in next. Echo launched at him, jaws locking around his wrist. The knife clattered across the floor. Then the scarred man grabbed the girl, yanking her upright, using her body as a shield. One arm pressed against her throat. "Don't move," he roared. "She's worth more than your life." The girl's breath came in panicked gasps. "Please, please don't." Graham lifted both hands, palms open. His voice dropped to a calm, lethal whisper. "Echo." The dog reacted instantly. Echo barreled forward, slamming into the scarred man's chest. The girl fell into Graham's arms as the attacker crashed into a pile of crates. Graham caught her before she hit the ground. The scarred man, desperate and furious, scrambled backward. "Tell Kane," he shouted to the others. "Tell him the girl knows too much." Kane. The name hit Graham like a blade dipped in ice. He knew that name. Too well. But before he could demand answers, the 3 men staggered out, clutching their injuries, disappearing into the truck. Tires screamed. The headlights vanished. Silence returned. The girl trembled uncontrollably, her breath ragged. Graham knelt with her still held tightly against him, checking her for injuries. Echo pressed himself against her side, offering warmth. "You're safe now," Graham said again, but softer, more fragile than before. She lifted trembling fingers to his shirt. "Don't let me die," she whispered. "Not like my sister." Graham froze. "Sister?" Before he could ask, her eyes rolled faintly and she fainted against him. He eased her into his arms, careful not to hurt her further. Echo nudged Graham's elbow insistently, whining, not afraid, but alert, focused. The dog tugged at the girl's torn cardigan. A small folded slip of paper dropped into Graham's hand. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, written in either terror or haste. "Move her before midnight. She knows the truth." The barn felt colder, the night tighter. Midnight was not far. Graham lifted the girl, holding her close. She was feather-light, shaking, clinging to life the way someone clings to prayer. Echo walked beside him, ears high, posture protective. As Graham stepped out into the night, he heard the wind whisper against the broken barn boards. Or maybe it wasn't the wind at all. Maybe it was the echo of another voice, another girl, one he had failed long ago, and tonight felt terrifyingly, painfully familiar. If you believe angels still walk among us, that God still sends help through the hands of men and the hearts of loyal dogs, then please like this story, leave a comment, and subscribe for more tales of faith, courage, and miracles. Grace woke with a startled gasp, her whole body jerking as if she had been dragged back from the edge of a dream she did not want to return to. She lay on the old leather couch in Graham's cabin, the pale morning light filtering through the blinds and settling over her like a thin, trembling veil. Her chest rose and fell too fast, too shallow. Echo sat beside her, the 4-year-old German Shepherd's sable-black coat glowing faintly in the light. His amber eyes were fixed on her face, reading every twitch of her breath, every flicker of fear. Graham stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed over his broad chest, his charcoal tactical jacket still on, as though he hadn't dared remove it all night. He watched her quietly, the gray in his eyes deepening with something too heavy to name. Grace pressed a shaking hand to her forehead. Where am I?" Her voice was barely more than a rasp. "You're safe," Graham said softly. "My home. No one can reach you here." But safety, for a girl who had been hunted, was a word that felt foreign on her tongue. She looked around the room, at the wooden walls, the single picture frame on the mantel, Echo's alert posture, then back at Graham, studying him as though trying to decide if he was real. Her throat tightened. Do you know who they were?" Graham didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched, the faint stubble along his cheeks catching the light. "I know enough," he said finally. "Enough to know you weren't taken by accident." Grace swallowed hard. She looked down at her hands, bruised and scraped, fingers trembling. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew someone had been watching me." Graham stepped closer. "How long?" Her eyes drifted, as if trying to pull memory out of fog. "Days, maybe weeks. At first I thought it was just my imagination. A man leaning on a fence too long. A truck idling on the street at 2 a.m. Footsteps behind me when I walked home. Then," she shut her eyes. "Then I disappeared." Echo let out a soft whine and nudged her elbow with his nose. She gave him a small, grateful smile, running her fingers through the thick fur on his neck. Graham crouched beside her. "Grace, what did they want?" She hesitated, her hands twisted together. "I was moved from place to place. 3 times, I think. Different barns, different sheds, different men. But one thing stayed the same." Her voice lowered. "They kept saying someone named Kane was watching, and that I'd be on something called Shipment 8. Graham felt the words hit the center of his spine like a shard of ice. Shipment, a human being turned into cargo. He didn't let emotion show, but Echo sensed the shift in him. The dog lifted his head, glancing at Graham before returning his attention to Grace. "You're not random," Graham said, more to himself than to her. "You were chosen, followed, targeted." Grace shook her head. "But I'm nobody." His eyes softened, though only by a fraction. People don't get taken because they're nobody. They get taken because they're valuable to someone. She flinched, a tremor of fear moving down her arms. Then, slowly, almost painfully, she whispered, "I escaped. Because of my sister." Graham felt his breath hitch, not visibly, but like something inside him tensed. "Your sister?" She nodded. "She told me to find you." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. The quiet became heavier. Grace didn't notice. She was lost in the memory. "She came to me once. I don't know if it was real or if I was delirious. She said I had to run, that I wasn't meant to die with the others." Grace's voice thinned. "She told me your name as if she'd said it 1,000 times. "What's your sister's name?" Graham asked, though dread already curled through his stomach. "Ellie," Grace whispered. "Ellie Holloway." Graham closed his eyes for just a heartbeat. The picture frame on his mantel held the face of a young woman, dark hair, soft smile, eyes full of trust. Ellie, the girl he once failed to save, the ghost that followed him into every silent hour of his life. Grace watched him, her brows knitting. "You knew her, didn't you?" Graham didn't speak. He didn't have to. Echo shifted uneasily, as if the air itself had thickened. Echo suddenly rose to his feet, his muscles rippling tense beneath his coat. He walked toward the cabin window, slow, deliberate. Then he growled, a deep, chilling sound, the kind of sound he only made when something living stood on the other side of the glass. Graham moved silently to the window. Outside on the frost-covered ground were footprints. Fresh. Close. Someone had stood there, watching, listening, waiting. Grace covered her mouth as fear drained the color from her cheeks. They found me again. Echo stared at the prints, tail stiff, ears locked forward. His body pointed not toward danger, but toward pursuit, as though telling Graham, we're not alone, and we haven't been since she arrived. Graham exhaled slowly, forcing composure back into his voice. Pack anything you came with, he told Grace quietly. She gave a broken laugh. I didn't come with anything. But then her expression shifted, as if remembering something. She reached shakily toward the side seam of her torn dress. Her fingers slipped inside the lining. From the hidden cloth pocket, she pulled out a small, battered object wrapped in threadbare fabric. A USB drive. It was old, scratched, possibly damaged from days of being pressed against her skin. She held it with trembling hands. My sister gave me this before she disappeared. Graham took it gently, as though it were made of glass. Grace's voice softened to a tremor. She told me only one person should ever see it. Her eyes lifted to meet his. That person was you. Echo let out a low, mournful whine. The room went still. Graham felt the barn's darkness return, not physically, but inside him. Heavy, familiar, merciless. The girl on the couch was shaking, exhausted, terrified. But she had survived something that should have shattered her. And Ellie's last message had been entrusted to her. He closed his fingers around the USB drive. Midnight. Shipment 8. Kane. Ellie. Everything was beginning again. He looked at Grace, and for the first time since she awoke, she saw something different in his eyes. Not pity, not fear, not confusion. A vow. Grace, he said quietly, whatever your sister wanted me to see, I'll see it, and whatever they're planning. His jaw hardened. We won't let them finish it. Echo rested his head against Grace's knee, as if sealing the promise. Outside, the wind rattled the porch rail like a warning, or maybe like a clock ticking down. If you believe God still guides broken people to the right doors, and that miracles often arrive in the shape of a brave man and a loyal dog, please like this story, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and divine protection. Morning settled uneasily over the cabin, the kind of pale, colorless light that felt like it refused to warm anything it touched. Graham Cole stood near the window, his shoulders tense beneath his charcoal tactical jacket. He scanned the tree line as Echo lay by the front door, ears alert even in rest. The German shepherd's sable-black coat rose and fell with each slow breath, but his muscles never fully relaxed. Not since the night they found Grace in the barn. Grace sat curled on Graham's couch, her knees pulled to her chest beneath the torn beige dress she had been taken in. She clutched Graham's old wool blanket around her shoulders like armor. The bruises along her wrists had darkened overnight, blooming purple and blue against her pale skin. She stared at the USB drive on the table, its scratched metal catching the weak morning light, unable to touch it again. Does it mean she's alive? She whispered. Graham didn't answer. His jaw tightened. His gray eyes flicked from the tree line to her face, as though trying to protect her from something he couldn't name. Before he could respond, Echo's head snapped up. A car door slammed outside, then another. The dog rose to his feet, hackles lifting, a soft growl vibrating through his chest. Grace's breath caught. "They found me." Graham held up a hand to quiet her. "Stay behind the hallway wall. Don't come out unless I call." Then came the knock. Firm, pretending to be polite. But the kind of knock that belonged to men who didn't wait for permission. Graham opened the door only halfway. 3 men stood on the porch. They wore navy work jackets with the logo of a local transport company stitched onto the chest, and each carried a clipboard. But their eyes, cold, assessing, had nothing to do with delivery routes or shipments. The first man, standing in the center, was tall and lean, with sandy blonde hair slicked carefully to one side. His beard was trimmed close, sharp angles defining his face. His eyes, pale blue, held a practiced friendliness that didn't reach past the surface. He looked about mid-30s, an age where someone had either built a life or ruined one. With him, Graham could not tell. The second man, to the left, was older, mid-50s maybe, heavy-set with a round gut pushing against his jacket. His skin was ruddy, nose red-veined from years of cheap whiskey. A man who'd lived hard and felt owed something for it. The third, younger, stood closest to the door. He had a buzz cut, sharp cheekbones, and a scar running across his mouth like a permanent smirk. His fingers drummed impatiently on the clipboard, tapping out a rhythm that matched the tension in his jaw. The blond man smiled. "Morning, sir. Sorry to bother you. We're checking deliveries in the area. A shipment went missing last night, and this is the last house on our route." His voice was warm, practiced, the kind that slid lies between syllables so smoothly most people wouldn't hear them. But Graham heard them clearly. "I'm not expecting any shipments," he replied, tone steady. The older man leaned forward, pretending to study his clipboard. "Strange. Says right here a package was logged near this property. Might have been left by mistake." His eyes lifted, scanning over Graham's shoulder into the home. Graham didn't move, blocking his view. Nothing was delivered. The young man with the scar smirked. "Mind if we check around the back, just to be sure?" Echo growled fully now, stepping between Graham and the doorway, head low, teeth bared. The blond man held up a hand, fake friendly. "Easy, boy." But Echo didn't ease. His amber eyes sharpened. A low rumble rolled from his throat, so deep it vibrated through the wooden floor. Grace, hidden behind the hallway wall, pressed both hands over her mouth. She recognized the blond man's voice. She had heard it before, outside the sheds, ordering men to move her, calling her cargo. Graham saw movement from the corner of his eye. The scarred young man shifting his weight to peer inside. Echo stepped directly into his path, barking sharp and loud, the kind of bark that said, "One more inch and I tear you apart." The man jumped back. "Jesus, call off your dog." Graham's voice hardened. He reacts to threats. The blond man's smile faltered, slipping for a split second before returning as a thin facade. "Listen, we'll just take a look around the property. Company policy." "No," Graham said. "Move along." They finally stepped away from the doorway, but not before the older man muttered something under his breath. "Shipment 8 leaves the state tomorrow. Don't let the same mistake happen twice." The words stabbed the quiet like a blade. The men walked toward their truck, talking in hushed tones. Echo followed them to the edge of the porch, staring intensely as they left. His tail stiff, ears pointed forward. The moment the engine faded into the distance, Grace stumbled from the hallway, tears brimming. That was them, she whispered. One of them. The blonde one. He was there. He told the others which girl to take where. Graham shut the door, locking it twice. We need to move fast, he muttered. Grace's hands shook. Shipment 8. They kept saying that at the barn. They said I was supposed to be moved with the others. But I ran. And they beat one girl so badly because she tried to help me. Her voice cracked. The blood on the cloth Echo found? It was hers. I know it. Graham placed the cloth on the table. It was small, torn, stained dark, now confirmed not to be Grace's. Echo sniffed it again, ears pulling back. A soft whine escaped him, almost grieving. Grace reached for the USB drive, holding it as someone might hold a memory of the dead. Her thumb brushed the metal casing, and her breathing hitched. Can we listen to it? She asked. Graham plugged it into his rugged old laptop. The screen flickered. A single audio file appeared. Ellie Holloway Wowan. Grace grabbed Graham's sleeve, her voice trembling. Please. He clicked. Ellie's voice filled the room. Faint, shaky, but alive. If you're hearing this, I'm not gone. Not yet. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. Echo sat beside her, ears forward, body frozen. The recording continued. There are 8 of us. Women moved from place to place. They call us by numbers, not names. Shipment 8 is leaving soon. I don't know where, but if this reaches my sister... Grace, listen to me. Run. And if it reaches Graham Cole, please, save them before the train leaves, before they disappear like I will. Static crackled. Then silence. Grace sobbed into her hands. Echo leaned against her leg, offering warmth. Graham stared at the screen, his jaw tightening with a grief he refused to voice. Losing Ellie once had broken something in him. Learning she had been alive after all, that she had still believed in him, set that broken piece ablaze. He stood and retrieved an old folder from a drawer. Inside were dates, maps, logs, everything he had collected years ago while trying to track the route Ellie disappeared along. Grace looked up, her eyes swollen. What is that? The file from the night she went missing, Graham said, and the transport schedule used by Kane's company back then. She swallowed. They match, don't they? He spread the documents on the table, aligning them. He didn't need long. The timeline, the route numbers, the departure windows, they all matched, exactly. Graham exhaled slowly, the truth solidifying like stone in his chest. Grace, he said quietly, they didn't just take you. She waited, breath trembling. They've been taking others for years, and your sister tried to expose them. Her knees weakened, and she sank onto the couch. So, the shipment, the one tomorrow. Graham nodded once, a hard, silent vow forming behind his eyes. It won't leave this state, not while Echo and I are breathing. If you believe that God still sends protectors into the darkest corners of this world, and that miracles often arrive in the form of courage, love, and loyal dogs, please like this story, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of faith and hope. The drive to Warehouse 17 felt longer than it truly was. Graham kept his truck moving fast but steady, headlights cutting through the early dusk. Grace sat in the back seat, wrapped in his old field jacket, her knees pulled tight to her chest. She stared out the window with glassy eyes, watching the abandoned industrial zone roll past. Rusted fences, broken signs, shattered windows staring back like hollow sockets. Echo stood in the cargo area behind them, posture rigid, ears pinned forward, tracking every sound outside the vehicle. The German shepherd seemed to know where they were headed, and his unease filled the air like static. Grace whispered, "It's this road. I remember this road." Her voice trembled. They blindfolded us, but I counted turns in my head. 3 lefts, then a long straight road, then the gravel. Graham didn't speak. He simply followed her directions until the truck rolled to a stop in front of a building with faded white numbers barely clinging to the metal siding. Warehouse 17. The place looked dead. No lights, no movement, only the rattle of loose tin panels swaying in the wind. But silence did not comfort anybody. Not tonight. Graham stepped out first, scanning the area with the sharp instinct of a man who once spent years hunting predators in human skin. Grace climbed out slowly, gripping the side of the truck for balance. Her legs were still weak from what she endured. Echo jumped to the ground soundlessly, landing in a ready stance, nose immediately pointed toward the warehouse door. Graham turned to Grace. "Anything familiar?" She swallowed. "Everything." He pushed the sliding door open, and the metallic screech echoed through the hollow building. Dust swirled around them like ghosts rising from sleep. The inside was almost empty, but not clean, not abandoned, not truly. A single chair sat in the middle of the floor. A metal chair, bolted into the cement, with strips of duct tape still clinging to the arms. Chains lay discarded beside it, coiled like dead snakes. The air carried an aftertaste of bleach and sweat. Grace's breath broke. That's where they kept her. The girl who tried to help me. Her fingers shook violently. Graham moved to stand closer, as if forming a silent shield around her. Clothes lay in a pile near the far wall, women's clothing, torn, mud-stained. A shoe with the heel broken, a sweater with one sleeve ripped completely off. Echo sniffed the fabric cautiously, then looked up with saddened eyes, letting out a low, heart-heavy whine. Next to the pile, Graham found a clipboard wedged beneath a crate. He pulled it free, dusting off the dirt. The text was printed: clinical, inhuman, shipment, 8 units, departure pending 8 units. Not 8 women. Units, cargo. Grace pressed a trembling hand over her mouth as her knees buckled. Graham caught her elbow, steadying her as she whispered, "They separated us into smaller groups. They said it made transport easier. I thought it was just a threat." She looked up at him, tears spilling down. It wasn't a threat. It was a plan. Echo suddenly trotted toward the corner of the warehouse. His paws clicked lightly against the cement until he reached a rusted metal hatch half buried under dust. He barked once, sharp, insistent, then clawed at the edges. Graham hurried to him. "What is it, boy?" He pulled the hatch open, revealing a stairway leading underground. A cold draft rose from below, sharp, chemical, almost acidic. Grace backed away. "No, please no. That smell, that's the stuff they use to sedate us." Her skin went pale as chalk. Graham descended halfway down the stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was small, windowless, barely more than a bunker. Its concrete walls bore faint stains and desperate scratches. On one wall, he saw something smeared in a dark brown streak. Old blood turned rusty. Words, shaky, unguided, terrified. "Don't forget us." For a moment, the world shrank to that one sentence. Graham's breath tightened. Echo whined from the stairs, ears back, tail low. A silent morning. Grace stood at the top of the hatch, her voice cracking. "She wrote that. The girl who saved me. She wrote that because she thought no one would ever find us." Her tears fell freely now. She thought we would disappear in the dark. Graham returned to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Someone found you," he said softly. and we're going to find the rest." Echo suddenly froze. Nose lifted toward the ceiling. His ears shot forward, body stiffening in full alert. He growled. Not at the hatch, not at the far wall, but at the air itself. At something only he could sense. Grace clutched Graham's arm. "What is he doing?" Graham stared at Echo, troubled. "He's tracking a scent, but not from today." Echo stepped backward slowly, gaze fixed on the chair in the center of the room. Then he whimpered, soft, low, almost mournful. Animals don't mourn unless they know suffering when they smell it. The sound hollowed the room, carving silence into something unbearable. Grace's fingers tightened around Graham's sleeve. "He's telling us they didn't leave willingly." Graham nodded. "No, they were dragged." Graham walked to the center of the warehouse, crouching beside a faint trail of scuffed marks on the floor. He brushed his fingers across them. "These are drag marks," he murmured. "Recent, meaning they moved the girls from here to somewhere else." Grace shut her eyes. "They said the shipment leaves soon. They said—" Her voice broke. "They said tomorrow night." Graham's gaze sharpened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the old transport schedule he had brought from home. He unfolded it on the metal chair, flattening the paper against the cold steel. Grace stepped closer, watching his expression shift from concentration to certainty to something darker, resolve sharpened into a blade. He tapped a date on the schedule. "The company Kane uses runs nighttime freight. One outbound train tomorrow night matches the timing." He looked at her. "They're not moving the girls by truck. They're moving them by rail." Grace pressed a hand to her heart. "By train. They'll be gone forever." Graham stood. Echo joined him, pressing his head against Graham's thigh in a gesture of loyalty that carried weight beyond words. Graham whispered, "We still have time." Grace's knees shook, but she met his gaze. "You'll stop them, won't you?" His answer was steady. "We will." He looked once more at the drag marks, tracing the direction with his eyes as if drawing an invisible map. "They moved them recently. They're close, and tomorrow night is the last chance to save them." His voice lowered, hard, certain. "Grace, they didn't just take you." He touched the drag mark again, feeling the cold cement beneath his fingertips. "They're taking all of them by train tomorrow." If you believe that God sends protectors into the darkest places to shine a light for the lost, please like this story, leave a comment of hope, and subscribe for more stories of courage and miracles. The night pressed down heavy over Kane Logistics, a sprawl of warehouses and truck bays sitting on the edge of the old rail line like a forgotten kingdom made of steel and exhaust fumes. Graham Cole watched from the driver's seat of a battered semi-truck he had borrowed from a nearby depot. The worn cap on his head shadowed most of his face, and the stained work jacket he wore hid the sharp lines of his former FBI physique. Even in disguise, his posture remained straight, disciplined, honed by years of moving through places where one wrong step meant you never walked back out. Grace sat low in the passenger seat, her breath shallow, wrapped in a dark hoodie Graham had found in the back of the truck. Fear tightened every muscle in her, but there was a fire beneath it. Something new, born from what Ellie's message revealed. Echo waited in the back cabin, the German shepherd's amber eyes alert, ears twitching at every passing sound. The dog's sable-black coat seemed to absorb the dim yard lights, as though darkness itself trusted him more than men. Graham placed a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. "Stay low, and stay quiet." She nodded, voice a whisper. "Be careful." He opened the door and climbed out. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud. Workers moved around the yard, most wearing neon vests and carrying clipboards. But not all of them looked like employees. Some were the kind of men who kept their hands in their pockets, like they were feeling something metallic for comfort. Graham blended in naturally, walking with the slow, tired gait of a long-haul driver. He passed a cluster of men standing behind a semi-trailer. One of them, tall and thin with a long salt and pepper beard braided loosely down his chest, smoked a cigar and laughed loud, his belly shaking under an orange vest. His face was weathered, harsh, sunken eyes, pitted skin, the look of a man who'd never taken responsibility for anything except his own appetite. A second man stood beside him, younger, with sharp cheekbones, greasy brown hair, and darting eyes that never settled. Neither paid him attention. Graham entered a narrow corridor between trailers, staying in the shadows. That's when he heard it. Two voices, hushed, urgent. He pressed himself behind a stack of crates and listened. "What about the Holloway girl?" A pause. Then a voice Graham recognized, the blond man from the cabin, cold and precise. "Kane's orders are clear. Eliminate her before sunrise. Too many eyes on her already." Graham's blood went cold. Grace. "Targeted again?" The second voice asked. "And the shipment?" "Loaded by dawn. 8 units, all accounted for this time." Their footsteps receded, boots crunching on gravel. Graham closed his eyes a moment, steadying the storm within him. Ellie's voice replayed in his head, "Save them before the train leaves." Grace's trembling whispers, 8 girls whose lives were shrinking by the minute. He returned toward the truck lot, keeping low. Echo, sensing movement outside, pushed his nose against the cracked window and let out a soft grunt. Grace peeked up, whispering, "What is it, boy?" Echo didn't answer with a bark. He simply stared toward the far end of the yard, his body stiffening. Graham followed the dog's gaze and saw a long row of containers waiting to be loaded onto flatbed rail cars. Men were checking seals, scanning tags. Kane Logistics looked like any professional transport hub, but everything about it felt wrong. Echo nosed the back door of the semi's cabin. Graham opened it just enough for the dog to slip out. The German shepherd hit the ground silently, nose instantly to the dirt. He paced in a zigzag pattern, sniffing deeply, tail lifting, ears locked forward with laser focus. Graham followed him, faking the posture of a bored employee checking tires. Echo slowed at a white shipping container with rusted hinges and a faded barcode. His breathing changed, turning fast and urgent. "Good boy," Graham whispered. "What do you smell?" Echo lifted his head and gave a single, sharp bark. Grace, still hiding behind the cracked truck door, whispered shakily, "That's one of the containers they used. I remember the smell of the disinfectant. That's it." Before Graham could respond, headlights swung across them. A pickup truck rolled up, tires crunching the gravel. 3 men stepped out, 2 holding flashlights, one with a metal pipe resting casually across his shoulder. The leader was thick-built with broad shoulders and a shaved head, his jaw crooked as if it had been broken once and never healed right. His eyes were mean, small, set too deep. He wasn't here for conversation. "You," he barked, pointing the pipe toward Graham. "Why you snooping around Kane's containers?" Graham knew the bluff wouldn't work now. He positioned himself between Echo and the approaching men. "Just checking equipment. Supervisor told—" "Supervisor didn't tell you, squat." The shaved-head man growled and swung the pipe. Graham pivoted, caught the pipe under his arm, and slammed his elbow into the man's throat. The attacker fell to a knee, gasping. The other 2 rushed in, one swinging a chain, the other charging with fists raised. Echo exploded forward, teeth bared, fur standing like a ridge of shadows. He lunged at the man with the chain, clamping onto his forearm. The man screamed, stumbling back. The third attacker threw a punch at Graham, but Graham ducked and drove his fist into the man's ribs, sending him staggering. He grabbed the man by the collar, slammed him against the container, and hissed, "Where are they taking the 8 girls?" The man spat blood. "Shove off!" Graham twisted his arm sharply. Bone cracked. The man howled. "Talk!" "Factory," he shouted. "Old processing plant near the rail. They're moving them by train at sunrise. Sunrise!" Graham's grip tightened. "Who gave the order?" The man's eyes widened with a fear Graham recognized, the fear of someone who has seen true evil. "Kane," he whispered. "Victor Kane. He wants the Holloway girl dead before morning. Says she's the only one who heard Ellie." Graham froze. His breath stopped. His vision darkened at the edges. The man swallowed hard. "Ellie, she ain't dead. Not yet." Graham loosened his grip, not from mercy, but from shock. Echo, still growling, suddenly softened, ears folding back as he nudged Graham's leg. It was as if the dog sensed something break open inside him. A wound, long buried, now ripped wide. Grace watched from the truck, her face wet with tears. She whispered, "Is she really alive?" Echo whined once, low and hopeful, turning his gaze toward the dark horizon, toward the direction of the rail line, almost as if he knew Ellie was waiting. Graham knocked the man unconscious and pulled Echo back toward the truck. Grace looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. But there was something else there, too. Faith. "What did he say?" she whispered. Graham climbed into the driver's seat. "They're at a factory near the tracks. They're loading the girls onto the train at sunrise." Grace's breath caught. All 8 of them. Ellie, too? Graham didn't answer. His jaw flexed, and he gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The truck rumbled as he started the engine. Echo jumped into the cabin, chest heaving, fur bristling but eyes bright with determination. Grace whispered, "We still have time, right?" Graham stared at the glowing clock on the dashboard. 2:47 a.m. Barely a few hours until dawn. His voice came out low, resolved, almost prayer-like. "Grace, we don't have time. We have a chance." He pressed the accelerator. Gravel shot behind them. The night tore open ahead. "We're going to save them," he said, "every last one. If you believe God puts his strongest warriors exactly where miracles are needed most, please like this story, comment your prayers, and subscribe for more stories of faith and courage." The abandoned factory rose from the darkness like the skeleton of some long-dead beast, its jagged metal ribs catching the faint glow of the rail yard lights. Graham parked the truck behind a line of rusted containers, killing the engine without a sound. Echo stood pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass, tail low, body trembling with the kind of focus that comes from instinct rather than thought. Grace sat rigid in the passenger seat, gripping the handle on the door so tightly her knuckles had gone ghost white. "You stay here," Graham whispered. Grace shook her head immediately. "No. Please, I need to see this through." "Grace, I won't slow you down." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were steady. The same stubborn courage Ellie once carried. Graham hesitated only a second before nodding. "Stay behind me, and behind Echo." Echo gave a low grunt, as if accepting the responsibility. The 3 of them slipped out into the night. The air was sharp, metallic, carrying the faint hiss of the distant train line. Graham moved with fluid stealth, body lowered, boots silent on the gravel. Echo followed seamlessly, nose twitching, ears constantly rotating. Grace crept a step behind, breath shaking but controlled. The factory's side door hung crooked on its hinges. Graham pushed it open slowly, metal groaning, the sound swallowed by the cavernous darkness inside. The interior was a maze of broken conveyor belts, hanging chains, dark pits where machines once stood. Echo sniffed hard, then moved sharply to the right, tail stiffening. Graham followed. "Is this?" Grace whispered. Echo stopped at a heavy, insulated door smeared with fingerprint grime. A cold draft seeped from its edges. "The cold room," Grace murmured, remembering. "They kept us here. Said cold made us easier to handle." Graham's jaw locked. He touched the metal. Ice clung to it. Then came a sound, soft, muffled, human. A whimper. Graham unholstered his sidearm quietly. "Echo." The dog lowered his body, ready to spring. He pulled the door open. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered, the only brightness in the entire factory. 8 young women huddled together, chained to a steel beam. Their skin was pale from cold, their clothes ragged, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Grace gasped and rushed in before Graham could stop her. "Grace?" a girl whispered, barely audible. Her voice was raspy from dehydration. She was thin, her dark hair tangled, bruises visible on her neck. Grace dropped beside her. "Maya." "Oh God, Maya." Graham scanned the room, counting every shadow, every exit. No guards. Too empty, too quiet. He crouched to inspect the chains, heavy industrial locks, designed not for people but for freight. "I'll get you all out," he said, voice firm, controlled. "But we need to move fast." As he worked, Grace whispered to the girls, comforting, soothing, touching their faces with trembling fingers. Echo paced the room anxiously until he froze, head snapping toward the doorway, body stiffening. Graham sensed it too. Danger. Boot steps. Several. Before he could react, 3 armed men stormed into the cold room, the metal door slamming against the wall. They wore tactical black. Faces hard, eyes colder than the ice clinging to the walls. The leader, tall, gaunt, with a scar slicing through his left eyebrow, raised his pistol and aimed directly at Grace's forehead. "Mr. Kane wants the Holloway girl dead," he said, voice as empty as a grave. "Before the sun comes up." Grace gasped, stumbling backward into the chained girls. Echo launched himself between them, teeth bared, growling so deep the walls vibrated. Graham moved faster than thought. He shoved Grace aside, then fired. The bullet struck the gaunt man's shoulder, spinning him against the door. The other 2 raised their weapons, but Echo was faster. He slammed into one guard's legs, sending him sprawling. Gunfire exploded, ricocheting off metal beams. Grace screamed. One bullet struck the floor inches from her. Echo snarled and lunged again, but the 3rd guard swung his rifle like a bat, slamming it into Echo's ribs. The dog yelped, a sound that cut through the chaos, sharper than any bullet. "No!" Grace cried, dropping to her knees beside him. Rage ripped through Graham with terrifying clarity. He grabbed a hanging chain, looped it around the 2nd guard's throat, yanked him backward, and slammed him into the wall. The man collapsed, unconscious. The gaunt leader fired wildly, blood dripping down his sleeve. Graham ducked behind a steel table as bullets sparked off the surface. He counted the rhythm of breaths, then struck. He rushed forward, slammed into the leader, and pinned him to the freezer wall. The leader tried to bring the gun up, but Graham twisted his wrist until the bone snapped. "Where are the others?" Graham roared. The leader coughed, eyes bulging. "Factory, near the rail line. But the last group, not here." "Where is Ellie?" Graham demanded. The leader's lips curled, even in pain. Not with this shipment. Graham tightened the hold. Is she alive? The man's breath hitched. Kane, keep special ones separate. For leverage. It was not a yes, but it wasn't a no. Echo whimpered again. Grace crawled to him, hands shaking. A dark stain spread across his side, blood matting the sable fur. Fear drained her face. Echo! Echo, stay with me, please. The chain of prisoners sobbed softly, terrified, freezing, watching their only protectors fight death itself in front of them. Echo lifted his head despite the pain. His amber eyes locked on Graham, not pleading, not afraid, commanding. He barked once, weak but deliberate, as if telling Graham, don't stop, save them. Graham swallowed hard. Something in that bark felt like a prayer sent from an animal who understood sacrifice better than humans ever could. Graham knocked the gaunt leader unconscious with a single blow. Then he rushed to Grace and knelt beside Echo, placing a steady hand on the dog's neck. He's hurt, but he's alive. We can save him. Grace sobbed in relief, pressing her forehead to Echo's. Graham rose and addressed the chained girls. I'm cutting you free. Stay together. Stay quiet. He used the broken rifle to smash the padlocks, one by one. The young women, trembling, barefoot, some barely able to stand, leaned on each other, guided by Grace, who pushed aside her fear to steady them. One girl, thin and pale with freckles scattered across her cheeks, caught Graham's sleeve. Her voice was faint. Ellie. She wasn't here tonight. They said she's being moved somewhere else, somewhere no one comes back from. Graham's vision tunneled. The world seemed to tilt sideways, but he steadied himself and nodded. Thank you. We'll find her. He led the group toward the emergency exit. Echo tried to stand, faltered, then pushed himself up again, limping heavily. Grace wrapped her arms around him, supporting his weight. They reached the steel door. Graham pushed it open, and a deafening train horn blasted through the night. The rail line was alive. Engines roared. Headlights burned through the darkness. The final shipment was moving, and Echo collapsed at Grace's feet, panting, eyes dimming as his body finally surrendered to pain. Graham stared at the rail line, at the monstrous convoy ready to swallow 8 innocent lives. We're out of time, he whispered. If you believe God sends strength even when the night seems darkest, please like this story. Comment a prayer of hope and subscribe for more stories of faith, miracles, and courage. The hospital lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow over the tiled floors as dawn crept into the world outside. After the chaos of the night, the gunfire, the cold room, the desperate escape, the calm felt unreal, too fragile, as if one loud breath could shatter it. 8 young women lay in the emergency wing, wrapped in warm blankets, IV lines dripping steady streams of life back into their exhausted bodies. Nurses moved around them with practiced urgency, whispering to each other, calling out numbers and instructions. For the first time in a long time, these girls were safe. Grace stood between 2 beds, her hair messy, her eyes swollen from crying but still shining with stubborn hope. She moved gently from one girl to another, brushing hair from foreheads, squeezing trembling hands, whispering reassurances she barely believed but needed to say out loud. The night had aged her years, yet something in her seemed stronger, like a flame refusing to go out despite the storm. Across the hall, behind a glass panel, Echo lay on a padded veterinary stretcher. The German shepherd's side was wrapped in thick white bandages, an IV needle taped gently to his foreleg. His breathing was slow but steady. The faint rise and fall of his chest was the most beautiful thing Grace had seen in days. A veterinarian, A woman in her late 50s, tall and thin with silver hair clipped back, her skin lined from years of compassion. Checked Echo's vitals carefully. Graham stood near her, arms folded tightly over his chest. His black tactical jacket was torn at the sleeve, stained faintly with dried blood, and his rugged face showed exhaustion he tried to hide. The veterinarian glanced up at him. "He's strong," she said softly. "Most dogs wouldn't have survived a hit like that. But he fought to stay alive. That tells me he's got something to live for." Graham exhaled slowly and nodded. Echo opened one amber eye, just enough to catch Graham's gaze. His tail thumped once against the pad, weak but unmistakably Echo. Graham crouched beside him and placed a hand carefully on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered. "Rest. We're not done yet." Behind him came a soft voice. "Graham." A girl, one of the rescued 8, stood at the doorway. She had honey-colored hair matted from days of captivity, freckles across her cheeks, and a thin frame wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her name was Lily, barely 20, with a nervous way of twisting the blanket's edge in her hands. "I have something," she said, stepping closer. She reached into the pocket of her patient gown and pulled out a small folded paper. "Your sister gave it to me, Ellie. She said if we ever escaped, I had to make sure you got this. She said you'd understand." Grace gasped softly, covering her mouth. Graham took the paper with trembling fingers. It was smudged, crinkled, and stained with something dark, blood or dirt or both. He unfolded it slowly. Inside, written in hurried strokes that were uneven and shaking, were 4 words. Graham, Echo. Don't give up. The room fell silent. Graham stared at the message, feeling his knees nearly give way beneath him. Ellie had been alive long enough to write this. She had known someone might escape. She had known to send a message. Through someone else. A message meant for him. Grace stepped beside him, voice breaking. She believed you would come for her. She believed Echo would find a way. Echo let out a soft, tired whine, as if agreeing. Graham folded the paper and held it against his forehead, breathing through the ache that spread through his chest. He whispered, "Ellie, you're still fighting." Echo suddenly lifted his head, ears twitching despite the pain. He stared at the window, the one facing south, toward the empty railway line where the final train had vanished into the night. His eyes sharpened, glowing with an alertness he shouldn't have had in his condition. Graham followed his gaze. For a moment, just one fragile moment, Graham swore he saw something outside. A flicker, a silhouette moving past the far fence. Too quick to identify, too soft to dismiss. Then it was gone. Grace whispered, "Graham, what is it?" He didn't answer, but Echo's reaction said enough. Ellie's message was not the last signal. Someone out there was still watching, someone who knew Graham was coming. The rescued girls were slowly wheeled into recovery rooms. Nurses spoke gently, offering warm drinks and soft blankets. Grace helped Lily settle into a bed and tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you," Lily whispered, "for coming back, for not giving up on us." Grace squeezed her hand. "You saved me too." Down the hall, Graham stood by the window overlooking the quiet parking lot. The first hints of sunrise painted the sky with strokes of lavender and gold. He rested both hands on the window frame, breathing slowly, letting the cold glass cool the heat inside his chest. Grace joined him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. 8 girls, she said. 8 souls alive because of you, because of Echo. He shook his head. Because of Ellie. She's the one who kept them holding on. Grace swallowed. Graham, you promise you'll find her, right? Her voice trembled, not from doubt in him, but from fear of the world where girls like Ellie disappear. Graham turned toward her, his gray eyes, tired, weathered, wounded, held something new. Hope sharpened into determination. I'm not just going to find her, he said softly. I'm going to bring her home. Echo gave a weak bark from his stretcher, one sharp sound, full of spirit despite his exhaustion. Grace laughed through tears, wiping her face as she rushed back to stroke his ears. Graham looked once more at the horizon. The railway lights flickered faintly in the distance. The tracks gleamed with the memory of the train that had slipped away hours before. Somewhere beyond that line of steel and dawn, Ellie was waiting. He whispered, "Ellie, I'm coming. If you believe God watches over the lost and sends strength to those who refuse to give up, please like this story, comment your blessings, and subscribe for more stories of faith, miracles, and the courage to keep searching." In a world that often feels dark and uncertain, grace can appear in the most unexpected moments. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a stranger who refuses to walk away, a loyal dog who shields us with his last breath, or a whisper of courage that finds us when we feel lost. And sometimes it comes as a quiet reminder that God has not forgotten us, even when the night seems longest. May this story remind you that miracles still walk beside us, that hope is never out of reach, and that even in our weakest hour, God can send strength in surprising ways. If this journey has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not alone. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith and courage. And may God bless you and protect you in every step you take.